Today, I would like to talk about what happens after we die. What happens after we die? That's the question we're looking at today. First of all, what is death? Death, the way we humans think about it, is the end of our life. Okay, so what is our life? Well, it starts when we're born and it ends when we die. We don't exactly have a good definition of what that is. Medical doctors can say biologically they know when the life ends due to certain physiological measurements that they can measure with a little doohickey device. I'm not a doctor, don't ask me the details. But obviously we've all heard many stories that disprove this, in the sense that people have faced their death, have been declared medically or clinically dead, and then have been revived and come back to life. And there's lots of stories about what they may have seen or experienced during those I was dead for 10 minutes type of experiences. So that's not the type of death we're going to talk about. It's not medical death. So what is death? Well, in order for something to die, there has to be a thing that exists, right? So something has to be in order to not be. So what is it that we're talking about that is existing? Okay. Because we're looking to understand what happens after we die. So first of all, well, who are we that is going to die? And when we investigate this, okay, well, my name is Charles. Obviously, you could change my name to John and it wouldn't really make a difference. So I'm not Charles, that's not who I am. I have this body. You could chop off my arm. I could have an amputated leg. And I would still be here and I'd still be alive. Obviously, if you chop off my head, maybe not so much. But so maybe we are not our limbs, but maybe we're our heart or our... Do we need our digestive organs in order to survive? Well, only to a certain extent. But we do need a heart. We need kidneys. So maybe we're our organs, including the brain. Is that who we are? Well, if you take a artificial or artificially grown organ, or if you take a donor organ or an animal's organ and implant that into my body, I still feel like I'm here. So obviously it wasn't my organ that was me. So that's not who I am. Maybe it's just the brain then. Maybe it's just the brain. Maybe I am my brain. Now, we know that people can have brain damage and parts of the brain can be damaged. And those people still exist and are still able to recognize in some cases that they're there. So it certainly is not the entire brain. So is there one part of the brain or some parts of the brain that are who we are? And neuroscientists are definitely working on this. The general consensus, though, I believe, is we are not our brain. The parts are all interchangeable is what I'm getting at. This is not 100% confirmed, but I think for the purpose of this question as to what happens after we die, it's probably the case. So everything that is the body is most likely not who we are and what we're talking about. So this is where it gets a little confusing, because when we talk about death, usually we're talking about the body dying. When our body slows down or stops working or gets in an accident and is no longer there, we would consider that person to be dead. And of course, they don't talk to us anymore and they don't move around anymore. So we have this paradox or dilemma that, as far as scientists can tell, it is not the body that constitutes who we are or what our consciousness or awareness is that says, it's me. It's not the body that's doing that. And yet we define death as when the body is no longer functional. There's no more breath. There's no more blood pumping. There's no more electrical signals happening. So it's just offline. Now, at that point, knowing or assuming that we are not the body, where do we go? So, when we were born, let's just go back to the beginning first. When we were born, all of a sudden, we were there. We weren't there before, and then we were there. Okay. Did that consciousness grow in the womb? When the first cell starts replicating, is there a consciousness or not? At what stage in the development of the fetus, the embryo and the fetus, does a consciousness exist? Okay, so I don't think that that's a question that we are prepared to answer, that anyone is prepared to answer. And I would assume that that consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, that you are, is there, and then becomes more aware of itself. But it's there maybe all along. So before you were born, where were you? And after we die, where do we go? Okay, it's kind of the same question is what I'm getting at. I don't see much of a difference between the you that's coming into life and that's about to be born and the you that's kind of going out of life and that's about to be dying. So we can kind of expand that question as to who are we before we're born and who are we, or where do we go after we die. So what we're really looking at now is this temporary arising of a conscious human body form, and then it falls away. So everything else before and after and outside of this temporary experience, we're wondering what that is. Okay, so that's where we would go after we die. Now let's just take a quick detour and think about, what about all those times during the day when you zone out or you lose yourself for a minute? Maybe you're caught up in thoughts or daydreaming, but when you come back to yourself and you say, oh, hold on, where was I? You weren't really there, right? What about when you doze off in the middle of the day and take a nap? You're not really there. How about when you go to sleep at night for 5 or 6, or maybe if you're lucky, 8 hours? You're not really there. So what's the difference between being asleep and being dead? Of course, if someone else comes and looks at you, they can see, yes, their body is breathing. But to you, because you're the only person who can answer this question, where do I go when I die? What's the difference between being asleep and being dead, as far as you're concerned? As far as you're concerned, there is no difference, because you aren't there to say whether or not you're alive at the time. It's only when you wake up from the nap or wake up from sleep in the morning that you realize again, I'm alive. Okay, so maybe where we go after we die is possibly, to a certain extent, similar to where we go when we space out for a second or even take a nap or fall asleep. Wow, okay, so those moments where I'm not aware or conscious of what's going on around me, my brain is just kind of offline for a second. I don't remember what happened. If you can't remember what happened 5 minutes ago for this one moment, were you alive or not at that time? Again, unless someone else is there to point it out and say, yep, I'm still measuring your breathing, I could see you're alive. Well, how would you know if you're alive at that time or not? So this begins to get a little bit more permeable and a little bit more flexible in terms of, we're thinking, I'm alive for however many years and then I die. So where am I? Actually, you're dying all the time. Not only in that sense that I just talked about, like temporary lapse in consciousness, but also to be alive is to be dying. We're constantly dying. Parts of us of our body are constantly dying. Cells are constantly dying and recreating themselves. So we really start to think about the question, not that simple. Where do we go when we die?